make sure that you have plenty of time to get there.
Thank you very much.
Not at all. Right, we can start. So, it's welcome to the 13th meeting in 2013 of the Rural Affairs, Climate Change and Environment Committee. Members and the public should turn off their mobile phones and Blackberries, etc. It's leaving them in flight mode or on silent will affect the broadcasting system. I have apologies from our member Claudia Beamish, and we wish her well, and welcome her substitute Claire Baker to the committee this morning. The first item today is for the committee to decide whether consideration of the work programme, agenda item 5, should be taken in private. Are we all agreed? Yes. Jane is not agreed. In that case, have you got something you wish to say at the moment about that?
Well, I have studied the content of the work programme, and I genuinely can't think of any reason why we wouldn't want to discuss that in public. It's a list of topics. We're not going to be this morning discussing the topics in detail or the issues surrounding the topics. We're just agreeing the work programme, so I can't see anything sensitive or that needs to be done in private. We're simply agreeing a programme of work. And because I can't think of a reason to justify doing it in private, I think we should do it in public.
Thank you very much for that. Any other members wish to make any comment? Alec Ferguson.
I would very briefly say, Convener, that while I can entirely understand where Jane Baxter's coming from, there are things that I might want to say in private during a work programme discussion that I would not wish to say on the record, and therefore I think we should stick with tradition, which is that work programme discussions are held in private.
Claire Baker.
Again, well, I understand the point that Jane's making. I would endorse what Alex saying, but I would also add to that, I certainly in the past 2 years have found being in private and discussing the work programme extremely helpful, in that it allows Spice and the clerks to participate in that process. I found that extremely valuable, and I would concur with Alec Ferguson's view.
And Claire Baker.
I'd just like to support Jane Baxter's comments. I think obviously there are times when a work programme, when it is something that's a bit more undefined than what we have before us today, there might be a case for making it in private. But today it appears that we have a list that we are looking to the committee to agree to, and it's a work programme that has previously been discussed by the committee, and I think it should be in public this morning.
Indeed. Angus MacDonald.
Yes, thanks, Convener. Given that on all the committees that I've served on so far, the work programme has been taken in private, I concur with Alex Ferguson and Graham Day. I think I have to say it's a bit presumptuous to assume that the members will not have questions that they want to ask in private. Therefore, I would support the work programme being taken in private.
Okay, thank you very much. There have been arguments made on both sides. Are you convinced that the majority of the committee perhaps don't agree with your position?
It's apparent that the majority don't agree, but I would like to maintain my position and ask that the work programme be considered in public.
Okay, I think that we should put it to a vote just now, and I would ask members who are in favour of taking this in public to raise their hands. 1, 2, and those who are against taking it in public, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We will have it in private as usual. Thank you. We move on to agenda item 2. Today we take evidence from George Lyon MEP via video conference on the CAP reforms. And let me remind members that because of the technical aspects of the video link, a delay will occur between members finishing their questions and George hearing them and responding. Equally, there will be a delay the other way. Because we are using a video link, it's important that no one tries to speak over anyone else. Therefore, members should speak only if I call them to do so, and should not try to interrupt a colleague or George. And that would affect our ability to hear the answers if you did. We've allocated roughly an hour. George has indicated that he has a vote to go to before the end of that hour. So welcome to George Lyon. Good morning, officially. And
good morning, Rob.
Good morning. And I invite the members, after I ask the first question, to ask questions as we have agreed. But looking at the big picture, George, what are the benefits of the new Common Agriculture Policy reform for taxpayers, for farmers and for the environment?
Well, depending on the outcome of the negotiations, which in terms of process, we're in the kind of second half of the game, so to speak. The objective of the Irish presidency is to try and complete the final text by the end of June. That means there is now 34 trialogues that will take place between now and the end of June, where the Council, the Commission and the Parliament negotiators will sit down and try and thrash out a common text between the three. And therefore, at the end of that process, what I hope will be the outcome is firstly that we have a support system that ensures that we have a reasonably level playing field across Europe in terms of the amount of support going into each country, that we have a much more sustainable agriculture through the incentives that will be provided by the CAP, because one of the great challenges is to ensure that our food production system becomes much more sustainable in the future to meet the rising challenge of growing demand worldwide and the need to cut the resources that the industry uses to produce its food. We also want to ensure that the industry is very market focused and that there are no barriers to trade across Europe from any of the regulations and the legislation that's agreed, and that we take advantage of the huge, or that Scotland is able to take advantage of the huge opportunities there are because of the growing worldwide demand for food over the next 30 years.
Thank you very much for that. I ask Graham Day to ask you the next question.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I just wondered, by way of a scene setter, could you apprise us of the sort of latest news from the European Parliament regarding approval of the budget, and just give us a general feel for where you think this is headed?
Well, the state of play in the budget process, because I'm Vice President of the Budget Committee as well, so I wear that hat in the Parliament too. The state of play, as far as the budget negotiations are concerned, is that the heads of state agreed the budget in terms of the council side of the argument on the 7th and 8th of February, and that new budget sees quite a substantial drop in the amount of money in heading 2, which is the CAP budget. The process now is that Parliament has taken a position where it said that we're not ready to agree to that budget proposal. We've instructed our negotiators, of which we have 3, to sit down and negotiate with the Irish presidency over the next 2 or 3 months some greater flexibility in how the budget is spent in the future, a mid-term review of the budget so that hopefully we can have another look at it once the economic times hopefully improve, because we've always got to remember this is a 7-year budget, it's not an annual budget, and therefore there is no government around the world that's setting an austerity budget for the next 7 years. So we need an opportunity to have another opportunity to open that debate up, and that will be probably linked into discussions about the closer monetary union as well. The third element of it, which is very important for the Parliament, as I say, is the amount of flexibility we have to manage the budget process. Currently, the Parliament does not have the flexibility that even the Scottish Government has to move money between headings in the year. We don't have the ability to roll over end-year underspends. They always return to Member States. And therefore, given the tightness of the budget going forward, we think flexibility is going to be a big, important issue. So once that negotiation is finished, hopefully there will be a vote in the Parliament to confirm the budget agreement by the summer, although it could possibly slip into September if the negotiations prove to be difficult.
Okay, thank you. And what's your best guess on whether agreement will be reached through the negotiation process?
Well, I think on the agreement on the budget, I think it may well be completed by July, but there's no guarantee. Running alongside that, the negotiations on the CAP reform will be running in parallel. As I say, the Irish presidency hope to complete the legislative agreement by the end of their presidency. It's quite a tall order, but I don't think it's out with our grasp, provided there's willingness on both sides to compromise as we go forward. We've already started the trialogues on the direct payments dossier, which I took part in last Thursday, and we've got another negotiation tomorrow. The first indications are that the negotiations I think will be quite constructive, and there is a willingness on all sides, both the Commission, the Council and the Parliament, to try and make progress, because at the end of the day, farmers, the rural businesses that are affected by the decisions we take need certainty to plan ahead, and it's, I think, absolutely essential that we try our best to try and complete this process by the end of the summer so that people can plan ahead for the introduction of the new programmes beginning on the 1st of January 2014 for the Rural Development and Structural Funds, and certainly for the introduction of the new direct payments in 2015.
Thank you.
Very good. Jim Hume.
Thank you, and good morning, George. In your view, how much do you think Scotland will get from Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 for the new 2014-2020 period, and how does that compare to 2007 to 2013?
We haven't seen the final figures published as to what each country may well get, and of course there's no overall agreement on the total sum anyway for the European budget until the Parliament votes on it. But I think we can be reasonably certain that the €363 billion that was allocated to the Common Agricultural Policy in the Heads of State meeting in February 7th and 8th, I don't think that figure is going to change terribly much. If that stays as it is, the cut in the direct payments part of the budget is somewhere around 58 billion, which is roughly about 12%, 12-13%, I think, real terms cut. The rural development budget is likely to suffer a similar reduction, and until we actually see published what the allocations are for each country, it's difficult to tell what the impact on Scotland will be, but clearly the budget will be reduced. We're already seeing for 2014 there's a proposal on the table from the Commission, because I'm one of the shadows on the 2014 budget. We've already seen a proposal from the Commission to cut the direct payments across Europe by 5% for this coming year. And that would affect farms who receive a payment over €5,000. Those under €5,000 would be exempt under the proposal put forward by the Commission. We will be opposing that because it hits disproportionately at both Scottish and UK farmers because of the bigger farm sizes that we have.
Thanks, George. And just to follow that up, you mentioned about the Pillar 2 funds, and there wasn't too much clarity at the moment on how that's going to be allocated. Is there any early sort of signs as to how they'll allocate Pillar 2 at all?
Well, clearly it was part of the deal in the negotiations that took place in the 7th and 8th. We still do not have the published figures of what that means for each individual country at the moment. We're waiting on that. And until we get these figures, we won't be able to actually engage in the negotiations. We've seen some rough figures on direct payments, and it looks as if the cut to the United Kingdom, as I recall, is somewhere around, I think it's 4 or 5%, but that's been done by an outside organisation, and until we see the Commission's figures, it's very difficult to tell exactly what the final outcome will be. Okay,
and just one small one as well. I get quite a few questions from farmers as in what they have to do to prepare for changes. Is there any advice yourself on that?
Well, I get this question from farmers all the time. How do I prepare for the new system? And in particular, what they are really concerned about is the move away from the historic payment system that the Scottish Government backed in 2004-05 to the new area-based payment system that's envisaged under the reform. That basically means a huge redistribution of money between farmers and potentially between different areas of Scotland. In the negotiations out here, what we've tried to do is to try and make sure that the Scottish Government will have the utmost flexibility to implement that in Scotland in as sympathetic a way as it possibly can. But the key issue, I think, for most farming businesses across Scotland is to know what the Scottish Government's plans are for implementing these changes. We see the Welsh Government have already published a discussion paper, and the Welsh ministers wandering around Wales taking views from farmers on that. So until the Scottish Government actually tells us exactly how they plan to use the flexibility to implement that new area-based payment system in Scotland, how long the timescale might be, how many regions there will be across Scotland, it's very difficult to answer farmers' questions about how quickly, about what actions they should take to try and plan for that big change that's coming down the track.
Okay, thanks.
Just as a supplementary to that, you talked about looking for the government to be sympathetic to farmers. Which farmers would they be sympathetic to in those circumstances, given that the Scottish Government, via Brian Pack, did an exercise in how the new area-based payments should be set out some years ago?
Well, it'll be for the Scottish Government to decide how they plan to introduce these changes. Brian Pack did set out some ideas back in 2010. Clearly, the package we now have on the table is quite different from some of the plans set out by Brian Pack, and certainly the money's now quite different in terms of the amount of cash available. So clearly, we're now getting to the stage where farming businesses need to start planning for the changes, which will be 18-20 months away. And therefore, the sooner that the Scottish Government can actually plan detailed plans of how they would implement the changes, then the better prepared farmers will be to make the relevant changes to their business to accommodate, because all experience from England and Germany, where these changes have already taken place, is that farmers need at least 6 or 7 years of time to adjust their businesses to the big changes in the amount of payments that they will receive over that period of time. And therefore, I think it's important and really, really essential that the industry are given a clear indication from the Scottish Government as to what their plans are for the future, because there is a lot of flexibility in how you might implement the change, and we need to know how that flexibility might well be used.
I'm sure that that's the kind of question that we'll continue to ask each of our witnesses, including the Cabinet Secretary in Scotland. Can we move on to the next question? Yes, Alec Ferguson.
This is very much sort of come into the area that I was going to ask about, and I therefore wonder if I might put my question.
Please do.
Or put one question I had just now. Good morning, George. Just on the subject of the transition from historic to area-based payments, the understanding has always been that that transition would be completed by 2020. Is there any flexibility now within that? And to what extent is it up to the Scottish Government, or what extent is it up to Europe to either front-load or equalise or indeed backload that transition? I wonder if you could just expand on that a little.
The positions of both the Parliament and the Farm Council have taken is one where it says that all member states in 2014 or 2015, depends what the start year is, must take the first step to moving away from historic payments. But by and large, both Parliament position and the Council position have said it will then be up to member states to decide the steps that are taken, the pace of the change, and indeed they will not be required under some of the options on the table to actually complete a full transition to equalising the payments across each of the regions that are set up in the country concerned. So there's huge flexibility in terms of how quickly you implement it, whether you actually complete the full equalisation of the payments in a particular region. There's also tremendous flexibility to set up as many regions as you might well choose to do so. The other flexibility that will be offered is the ability to top up some of the first hectares with a double payment, which has been put on the table by the French government. And that they're envisaging that on the first 50 hectares, you would get double the regional payment, and then it would be the average payment after that for every other hectare. Now, whether that's of any advantage to Scotland or not, they in particular are introducing that model because they believe it will take money from their arable areas and transfer it into their livestock areas. Without doing the modelling in Scotland, I have no idea whether that's an advantage to Scotland or not. But I think the answer to your question is there's a huge amount of flexibility. There will be no requirement to absolutely equalise the payments over the period to 2020. I think the final outcome will be that they maybe should be within 20% of the average, either 20% below or 20% above. And what that does actually is minimise the transfers between farmers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Jane Baxter.
Morning. What are the implications for Scotland of the positions taken by the Parliament and Council on the transfers of funds between the pillars of the CAP? How will this affect the Scottish Government's ability to fund the next RDP, SRDP, and will current levels of modulation be allowed to continue?
The positions that are the proposals on flexibility, the Council's proposals are slightly different from the Parliament's. The Parliament's proposal is that Member States should have the flexibility to transfer 15% of the direct payments across into rural development funding, provided they put up matched funding, i.e. for every pound they transfer, they put a pound of their own money on the table as well. We also are allowing member states in areas, in countries whose average direct payments are below the European average payment, allow them to transfer 10% of their rural development budget back the way into the direct payments. And the United Kingdom would come into that category, that flexibility would be allowable there. The Council's position is different in that they say that they should be allowed to transfer 15% from Pillar 1 into Pillar 2 with no matched funding at all. So it would be just take the money straight over and put it into the rural development budget without topping it up from national funds. They're also allowing member states to transfer, all member states to transfer 15% of the rural development funds back the way. The Parliament, I think, will take a pretty tough line against that because it will lead to huge distortions, we believe, in the application of the policy right across Europe.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine, thanks.
Okay. What is the actual position, George, that they're talking about and vice versa up to 25% of the Pillar 2 to Pillar 1?
That's correct. In addition to the 15% for every member state, there's also still the 10% for member states who have a below average payment across Europe. I should have made that clear. So in totality, it could be 25% from Pillar 2 to Pillar 1 for member states such as the UK, but mostly it's all of the Eastern European states who come into that category.
No, thank you for that. We'll move on to process issues and the next question, which was going to be asked by Angus. Yep. Right.
Yes, thanks, Convener. Good morning, Mr. Lyon. You spoke earlier this morning of your hope of concluding a final agreement on CAP reform by the summer, and that's certainly, as we know, the wish of the Irish presidency as well. You also mentioned that the ongoing negotiations between the Parliament, the Council and the Commission on a final deal are going well. However, it's clear that there are some sticking points. Can you tell us what some of these or all of these sticking points are?
The differences at the moment appear to be, I guess the major differences are on the flexibility between Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, where that has huge implications if it's changed one way or the other. So that will be one of the big battle areas. The second areas is on the capping of payments, where the Council have a position that allows it to be voluntary rather than mandatory for each Member State to apply it, and the Parliament is mandatory. On the Young Farmers Support Scheme, there's a voluntary versus mandatory argument there as well. On greening, the Council's position has much more flexibility built into it, where farmers in agri-environmental schemes and in certified schemes would be able to qualify for the greening payment. The Parliament originally had that position in the Agricultural Committee vote, but then it was reversed in the vote in the Parliament itself. So we've got far less flexibility in the position that we're taking on greening. In terms of the flexibility for implementing the change from historic to area, I think both the Parliament and the Council are in a similar position. The Parliament position on double funding, i.e. farmers receiving both funding for an agri-environmental scheme and funding for the greening payment in Pillar 1, the Parliament is utterly against double funding, and the Council are slightly in favour of double funding, which I find very difficult to justify. The final big areas of difference is on the issue of the regulation of the marketplace, the so-called single CMO legislation, where the Parliament has taken a very extreme protectionist position. As some would argue, actually gives powers to renationalise some of the markets within the European Union. And certainly would allow countries to put up quite serious barriers against free trade. For Scotland, if the United Kingdom is major exporting countries, that would be a disastrous outcome. And the Council position is very much against that protectionist route. But certainly here in the Parliament, Michel Dantin managed to get that southern agenda back by quite a reasonable majority here in Parliament. So these are the kind of key discussions that have still to be thrashed out over the next 2.5–3 months.
Thank you. That's quite a list of sticking points. Is there, given that we need to have a solution by the summer, do you see an issue, for example, or do you see a solution on the double funding issue being secured before the summer?
Well, I think the position is really clear on the double funding. Under WTO rules, double funding would be struck down if there was a complaint made to a WTO panel. And therefore, the idea that you would allow double funding, and there appeared to be a majority in Council in favour of that, seems to me to open up yourself to a challenge right away. And therefore, I believe that sense will prevail. The Commission are utterly against it, and we're utterly against it. And hopefully the Council will be forced to back down.
Okay, thank you. I know you've criticised the failure of the European Parliament to listen to reason regarding the electronic identification of sheep, and you've also raised concerns regarding a return to wide-scale use of intervention and storage, and warned that this could take us back to the bad old days of milk lakes and food mountains. Using EID cross-compliance and intervention as two examples, what can be done to address your concerns, or is it too late for that?
Well, I think what was really disappointing was that in the vote in the Parliament, the cross-compliance and EID, which the Agricultural Committee had voted to delete, and would have given us a very strong negotiating position to try and force the Commission to do something about the practical challenges of implementing that cross-compliance requirement. That has now been lost because none of the big political groups supported that deletion in the Parliament, and therefore the Greens, the EPP and the Socialists all voted it back into the text. So we now have no negotiating position on that whatsoever. In terms of the intervention buying, that's the argument on the single CMO. The Council and the Commission are utterly opposed to that re-regulation of the marketplace, and one would hope that, from our perspective, they would prevail in that negotiation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Move on to Richard Lyle.
Good morning, Mr Lyons. Basically, the new cap won't be implemented until 2014, and transitional measures will apply. What do we know about the implications of these in regards to rural development and what will be the implications for Scotland as a whole?
Well, it appears as if, it certainly looks as if the direct payments will not, the new legislation won't be implemented to 2015. And given that we don't have a final agreement yet, I think that's a wise course of action, because it will take quite significant time to implement the new changes. If you look at the lessons learned from England, where they implemented the change from historic payments to area payments, it was a complete and utter disaster in terms of its implementation. So there's got to be a lot of careful thought, and there will have to be quite significant investment by the Scottish Government to make sure that the IT systems can actually cope with that change. And I think Germany certainly is the model for that. On rural development, I think all that will happen is an extension of the current rural development programme for an extra 12 months until the new one comes into play. A lot depends on the negotiations and how quickly they progress. I think the Commission are still hopeful that if they can reach agreement by the summer, that there might possibly be the possibility of implementing the new rural development programme in time for the beginning of 2014. So it may well be that it goes ahead, but the direct payments package is not brought into being until 2015. A lot depends on the outcome of the negotiations. I would imagine the Scottish Government are already starting to work up the new rural development programme for the future, given that it's not a contentious legislative proposal. By and large, there's not a lot of big challenging issues within that legislative package. So I think with some certainty you could start to prepare for the new rural development programme starting in 2014. But clearly, the Minister would be able to tell you better whether that's been planned already by the Scottish Government.
Yes, can I further ask what again would be implications for agri-environment schemes, and will the transitional measures allow new applicants to enter schemes?
Well, I think the new are you talking about new entrants for the direct payments or new applicants for agri-environmental programmes?
New applicants for agri-environmental schemes.
Well, clearly, if there's a new programme to be implemented, it will be opened up for bids, I guess, from the Scottish Government. And I don't know whether they'll use a point system to decide who gets it. A lot depends how much money they put into the programmes and how much funding they put in. So a lot will depend on the size of the budget that's allocated for that, and indeed what point system they use to try and ration it, because basically that's what a point system does, is ration the agri-environmental schemes because there's not enough money in them. At least that's been the habit in the past. So again, it would be for the Minister to make these decisions. That I don't actually know what his plans are.
Thank you very much.
Could I just ask specifically, George, about new entrants into the actual cap itself and the point of their entitlement to take part and so on. So will the transitional measures have an effect on that?
Well, clearly, in terms of transitional measures, there will be no opportunity to deal with those who have no single farm payment until the new system comes in. What we have certainly tried to do in the Parliament text is to introduce new entrants as one of the priorities for the Young Farmers scheme. So it should be young farmers and new entrants who should get that help. Secondly, in the creation of the National Reserve article, we've tried to draw as widely as possible to make sure that anyone who currently doesn't have an entitlement does qualify. Of course, the test for that is having claimed one entitlement in one of the 3 years, 2009, 10 or 11, and making a claim in the 2015 claim year, if that's the decision when it's going to go ahead. We've also made sure that in the National Reserve that Member States can use National Reserve in year one and subsequent years as well, to make sure that we try and address the concerns there are about a number of farmers who have no entitlements due to the not being able to register for them in the first instance.
That's helpful, thank you. Well, changes to Pillar 1, we want to move on to Alec Ferguson.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I think this subject's been largely covered earlier on, Convener. Unless anybody else got any other points they wish to put, I'm quite happy.
Okay, thank you for that. Nigel Dawn? No? Yeah, Claire Baker? Yeah.
Thank you. It's relevant to the issue of the transition. There have been proposals from some farmer representation unions, which I think they're describing as an Irish tunnel approach that would give a longer run-in to change. What is the kind of general, how is that being received as a proposal?
It's part of the text it's part of our text, and it's part of the text in the council proposal. I mean, there's huge flexibility being introduced for that movement away from historic payments to area payments, and it's all being handed down to member states, and well, it'll be to the Scottish Government, because all of the powers will be handed direct to the Scottish Government. It won't be a UK government decision. As we currently have, there is a Scottish CAP, a Northern Irish CAP, a Welsh CAP, and an English CAP currently under the devolved arrangements. So all of these decisions and the flexibilities that are there will be for the Scottish Government to take up and run with, and it will be up to them to decide how they want to use them. But the Irish Tunnel that you refer to, which basically says that by the year 2020, all farmers must be within 20%, either above or below the regional average payment, that's in our text, and it's in the council text as well. So it does mean, though, the impact of that is that the historic element, some of the historic element of the payment will continue beyond the 7 years of this current cap period.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Returning to changes to Pillar 1, Nigel Dawn.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Mr. Lyon. Can I ask you what the implications are for Scottish farmers of the greening requirements?
The implications for Scottish farmers are reasonably serious, I would argue. The greening requirements, of which there are three, one of them is to retain the permanent pasture that you currently have on farm, which was the proposal by the Commission, and there will be very little opportunity to renew that pasture at all. We've changed that in our text, and so has the Council, to make it a regional requirement, as it currently is under cross-compliance. So it takes it away from being an on-farm requirement to a national average, that you keep the same level of permanent pastures you had in 2014, with some flexibility for renewal. I think it's about 5%. So I think that's a step in the right direction for Scotland. On the crop diversification proposal, and indeed the ecological focus area proposal, we had a text in our proposals that came from the Agricultural Committee that would allow farmers who had 75% grassland and grew less than 50 hectares of crop to be exempted from these two requirements. We lost that in the vote in the plenary, so our position is still that they do not have an exemption, but in the council text that exemption exists, and that would be a big plus for Scotland as well, because we think that these two requirements for predominantly grassland farming, which is the majority in Scotland, would be unnecessary, to be quite honest. In terms of the ecological focus area requirement, which has been the focus of much concern, our proposal and the Council's proposal envisages only going to 5%, with a review of that 5% ecological focus area requirement in 2017, after a review carried out with the Commission, to decide whether to go to 7% or to stay at 5%, or indeed to scale it back if it was found not to be delivering the environmental biodiversity corridors that the legislation envisages. So in terms of flexibility, the Council text has the maximum flexibility. Ours is closer to the Commission, which is no flexibility for Member States to implement that. So until we see the final outcome, it's difficult to know how much flexibility the Scottish Government will have to respond to the concerns of Scottish farmers.
Thank you for that. Do you share my concern that that flexibility is, in the context of Scotland, absolutely essential?
Absolutely. That's why I fought tooth and nail to get it into our text. I was particularly concerned that a big push by our Green colleagues in the Green Group, and indeed in other political groups, who saw that as a weakening of the greening actually won out in terms of the vote in plenary. We were absolutely adamant that the flexibility had to be accompanied by the Commission signing off on any use of that flexibility, so that there was a check to make sure that the flexibility wasn't used as an excuse to water down the greening requirement. Thankfully, it's in the Council text, that flexibility, and I hope that when it comes to final negotiation that we can agree on the flexibility that's needed to make sure that Scotland and the Scottish Government have the power to implement it in the way that suits Scottish needs.
Thank you.
Move on to another question in this area from Claire Baker.
Thank you, Convener. You've spoken about the budgetary constraints that are being faced, but at the centre of reform is really the drive towards making sure there is the best use of public money and support is directed where it is most needed. Part of this has obviously been trying to tackle the so-called slipper farmers. Do you feel that the requirements to ensure a minimum level of activity will go some way to address this?
Yeah, I think that the measures that are being offered to member states, which are the minimum activity test, the test of keeping the land in good agricultural condition, and the third test, which is a member states, a European requirement to set up a negative list of organisations that are definitely not farmers, the so-called negative list. And that would include golf courses, airports. I mean, there's a whole range of local authorities. There will be a European list to that. The only question I think that's been argued around is whether member states have the ability not only to add to the list, but whether to subtract from that European list. That's where the argument is between ourselves and the Council. We have said that they could both add or subtract. So there's a concern that if you leave the ability to subtract, member states would just empty the list out. So there maybe needs to be, I think, in principle, we'll come round to the position that says there's a European list that member states then can add to as a way forward. There's one other proviso that would also allow an economic test on those that are caught by that negative list to demonstrate that they are genuinely farmers, so that if there was an organisation that had a substantial farming enterprise, whether it be an airport or something like that, they could demonstrate it, provided they could demonstrate there's a substantial economic activity, that would then be allowed. I'm not 100% sure whether that's a good idea or not, and we're still negotiating on that particular issue with the Council.
Are you confident that within the debate on the focus being on activity, that there is enough accommodation in there to meet the needs of farming in perhaps more remote areas and some of the challenges that Scotland faces in terms of activity that are on some farms?
Yeah, I think there is enough flexibility. I mean, we've managed to get in the requirements of the Scottish Government into the text to give them the tools. It's they that will implement this, of course, to give them the tools to try and stop this, because it is a uniquely Scottish issue in that we have a third of our land which currently has no claims against it, and therefore this practice of people selling up and then renting some cheap land is very, very much a Scottish issue. If I talk to my Irish colleagues about this issue, and they cannot understand how anyone could make any economic sense out of renting land, which in Ireland is about 250 to 300 euros a hectare, and then putting a payment on it, it doesn't make any financial sense. So it doesn't happen there. So we have this unique set of circumstances. One other flexibility we have in the text as well is that the member states and the Scottish Government would have the power to say in some of that land which is unfarmed that there would be a coefficient used where instead of 1 hectare qualifying for a payment, it may be 4, 6 or whatever. And that's one way of actually trying to limit the huge move of money from productive areas to non-productive areas. So there's a whole lot of tools in the toolbox that the Scottish Government hopefully will be able to use, and it will be up to them then to decide how they use that toolbox. Our job is to make sure the tools are there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Another question from Graham Day.
Thank you, Convener. George, can you outline for us the up-to-date position of Parliament and the Council on coupled payments and where you think we'll actually end up in this regard? I'm thinking specifically about how Scotland's ability to continue the beef calf scheme might be impacted upon.
The position, as far as the European Parliament is concerned, is that our text says you can allow 15% recoupling, and you can use it to couple to tobacco, cotton, you name it. Every product across the European Union can be recoupled according to our text, which I think is completely crazy, to be quite honest. It takes us back to the bad old days, especially subsidising tobacco and cotton, which we've moved away from. The Council text is an improvement on the Commission text, and it says 7% for those member states who were using the couple payments previously, and 12% for the 2 or 3, I think it is, member states who had special exemptions previously. I think that's a reasonable compromise, the Council text, but clearly there will be a negotiation and we'll need to see where that outcome comes from. As far as operating the Scottish beef calf scheme, you should be able to, in Scotland, under both texts, to implement a better Scottish beef calf scheme if the Minister thinks that's appropriate.
Thank you.
Another question, Jim Hume.
Thanks, Convener. Just regarding capping and the Parliament and the Council's positions on capping individual farms, businesses, and where do you think we are with that, and what outcome do you think we'll get to, George?
Well, it's difficult to know. The Council text says it's voluntary on Member States to introduce a cap on payments. The Parliament text says it's obligatory and that the maximum is €300,000. The danger I foresee, given Scotland's farm size, is that once you introduce that principle, then it's fine as long as the cap stays above what the current payments are that any individual farmer has at the moment. But if you start ratcheting, once the mechanism's there, you can ratchet down as low as you possibly can. And the danger is then that all the small farmers in Europe escape the cap and we're penalised. There's also a second argument, I think, which concerns me about capping. If we are moving away from income support as being the rationale for direct payments to one of payments for public goods, and up to 50% of the new direct payments can be targeted at supporting LFA production, at young farmers, at the greening requirements. So it's payment for environmental services, payment to support the rejuvenation of the industry, and payments to make sure we've still got our production continuing in upland areas. And once you start moving to payment for public goods, then I don't understand what the argument for capping is, because clearly if a farmer's delivering X number of public goods, then he should get the payment for it that's relevant, rather than a cap being introduced. So I guess it depends on your philosophical outlook, whether you believe that direct payments should continue in the future as income support, or whether they move to payments for public goods. Certainly our political group believes that we need to move in the direction of payment for public goods, of which LFA support is a crucial element of that.
And just to follow that up, are you able to second guess or first guess what the outcome will be? Where do you think we'll get to, in your view, on this outcome?
If I was a betting person, I suspect the voluntary route may be the compromise, but it's very difficult to know at this time. We haven't even had that discussion in the trialogues yet. So until we see what flexibility Council have on that and whether Parliament is willing to be flexible, it's difficult to know.
Thanks, Convener.
What was your view about the idea of publishing the figures about the payments that are received by farmers in their businesses?
Well, our amendments reintroduced it back into the Parliament text, and thankfully we won that vote in the plenary after it being heavily defeated in the committee. Although there was a last gasp attempt by the centre-right group to introduce another alternative text, which basically would hide the payments again. And there's, thankfully, it appears now to have been defeated by the four other groups in the Parliament. So our position is to publish, and I think the argument still remains as to whether those in the small farmer scheme, in the small farmer schemes, which will be about 40% of the farmers in Europe, whether they're exempt or not exempt. That will be, I think, the argument on that one.
Thank you on that particular point. As you probably know, the UK Environment Secretary visited the NFU in Scotland at the end of last month. And on the subject of obviously things like coupled payments, there's a big disagreement between the Scottish approach and the UK one. But when we were talking at the beginning about what the taxpayer thinks, there was an interesting comment from Owen Patterson, who said that on coupling, where subsidies remain linked to production, as he saw this as difficult to sell to taxpayers who are under pressure because of Europe's economic woes, was stated by Joe Watson in the Press and Journal. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, I think the beauty of the current devolved system, of course, is that in Scotland, all decisions are made in Scotland, and provided the flexibility is agreed at European level to allow you to take different decisions, then I'm very happy for Owen Patterson to have his view and implement it in England. That's his job, and the English position, or the English situation, is totally different from Scotland. They've got 75–80% is arable farming, and 15% LFA. We're the complete opposite. So, as you would imagine, then we have a different agenda. And the most important thing is to ensure that we have the flexibility to implement what's appropriate for Scotland. And indeed, if you look back to the history of devolution, we have 4 different CAPs currently in the United Kingdom. There is the Welsh one. There is the Northern Irish, where they've got a mix of area payments and historic payments, and you've got the Scottish one, which has the historic payments and it's got the coupled payments as well. And you've got the English one, where it's all area payments alone. So I think devolution works fantastically well. We've got the best of both worlds currently, and I would imagine that the Scottish Minister would want to use that flexibility to introduce a new Scottish CAP that reflects the current challenges we face.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you for those comments. We will be meeting Owen Patterson in June in this round of discussions, and I wonder if you've got any final message to him that you might wish to pass on with regard to the UK Secretary's approach to the allocation of the share of CAP which is finally agreed.
Well, my view, as I've said many a time, is that under the current historic payments calculations for the UK, which the Scottish Parliament voted and backed back in 2004, I remember the vote well, it was unanimous across every party. Under that system, because it's a historic calculation, we currently now, if you look at on an area basis, we have quite a low pot of money in the direct payments. Clearly, if Scotland decides to abandon that historic basis for distributing the payments, and Northern Ireland and Wales does the same, although Northern Ireland's partially decoupled already. Once that happens, there has to be a negotiation within the United Kingdom of what the new distribution key will be. But it can only be once we've moved away from historic, of course, in the 3 parts of the UK that still retain that. And of course, the potential is that we then move from 130 euros a hectare up to the UK average of 224. But clearly, until we abolish in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, that debate cannot really start. And of course, that debate will only come into force provided we're still part of the UK. If we leave, then who knows what implications might well be.
Well, that's a very interesting point, perhaps, at which to end our discussion at the moment. I'm sure we'll continue it in due course. We'd like to thank you very much for those contributions. They add to our sum of knowledge, and indeed it's good to get an up-to-date view from the European Parliament from yourself. So thank you very much, George Lyon, for those points, and we will suspend the meeting just now. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the committee for their time.
Come to the session as the committee's agenda item 3 on subordinate legislation. And we're going to be hearing from evidence from the Minister on the CRC Energy Efficiency Scheme Order 2013 SSI 2013 draft. Instrument's been laid under the affirmative procedure, which means the Parliament must approve it before provisions may come into force. So following this evidence session, the committee will be invited to consider the motion to approve the instrument under agenda item 4. And I welcome the Minister for Environment and Climate Change, Paul Wheelhouse, and his officials, Bob Irvin, Deputy Director of Climate Change and Water Industry, and Ronan McGarry, Policy Advisor on Emissions Trading Branch, Scottish Government. Good. Welcome, and I ask the Minister to speak to the instrument.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, everyone. Convener, members, this order implements the CRC Energy Efficiency Scheme simplification. It's a package of measures designed to reduce the administrative burden of the scheme while maintaining the majority of its emissions coverage. The CRC is a largely devolved scheme which Transport, Infrastructure and Climate Change Committee approved in 2010. As a key part of our ambitious climate change strategy, I'm pleased to say there was unanimity at the time, and I hope it will be the same today. The CRC is a mandatory UK-wide trading scheme that targets large non-energy intensive organisations to incentivise energy efficient practices. There are 132 such organisations that participate in Scotland, including many of our largest private companies and public bodies. CRC participants are responsible for about 10% of the UK's carbon emissions, some 54 million tonnes of carbon dioxide annually, and have an average annual electricity spend of £500,000. Scotland's participants account for about 8% of our national emissions, or 4.1 megatonnes of CO2. Following continued stakeholder engagement and dialogue with the UK Government and other devolved administrations, we committed to simplify the scheme, and a public consultation last year led to this draft order. The majority of the changes will be brought in at the start of Phase 2 of the scheme in 2014, but we intend to implement some of the more pressing changes, notably a reduction in fuel coverage from this year, so that participants can immediately benefit from the reduced compliance costs. Overall, the simplification should lead to an average 55% administrative saving for participants, or £272 million up to 2030, with a net present value of £77 million compared to the existing scheme. With these changes in place, it is intended that the scheme will be less burdensome for participants while still encouraging investment in energy efficient practices, with the associated benefit of lowering Scotland's carbon emissions. I have agreed with my UK and devolved government counterparts to review the scheme in 2016 to ensure it is operating as intended, and the order has passed without issue through the Northern Irish and Welsh Assemblies and the House of Lords. As such, I hope that the committee will also approve the order so that we may enact its proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would invite members to ask any questions about this, and Graham Day is going to ask the first one. Richard Lyle, second one.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Minister. You mentioned there the potential impact of these measures in terms of financial savings for those involved. Is there any possible means of estimating the positive or the nature of the positive impact that might have on carbon emissions, these measures?
Well, the coverage of the proposals is broadly the same. There have been some changes both in and out in terms of the coverage of the CRC scheme that's been proposed today in terms of simplification. So there have been some fuels that have been taken out, but other areas have been brought in terms of sort of electricity consumption by business has been brought in, sort of energy consumption. So the net impact is broadly unchanged from the previous coverage. So in terms of the changes today and what they deliver in terms of additional emissions, there's not a substantial change, but the scheme itself obviously will contribute substantially to reducing emissions by 2027. We estimate that about 10% reduction for the business and public sector as a result of the CRC scheme. So it does play a significant role in bringing down both UK and Scottish emissions.
Richard Lyle.
Yes, good morning, Minister. I've actually got two questions. One's to Mr Ronan McGarry and one to yourself. If I could ask Mr McGarry, I note, as I say, your emissions trading branch. it says in part 4 of the thing on page 3 that the administrator must maintain records in regard to allowances. Do you administrate this, or is this administrated through another body?
It's actually administrated by the Environment Agency for the UK as a whole, with assistance from SEPA for Scottish participants, but data on allowances stuff is kept by the Environment Agency for a secure registry.
Do you just keep a note or check on and the points the Minister has just made, the reduction?
We have access to all the data, certainly, but it's kept securely by the EA.
Okay, if I can turn to page 11 of the situation, the Scottish, to the Minister, the Scottish Parliament corporate body in CRC, the SPCB was required to comply with the CRC for 2011-12. The cost of purchasing year's allowances for the SPCB was £38,136. But I note that in the second paragraph that says that as a result of the reduction in electricity use by the Scottish Parliament, which is, I'm sure is welcomed by everybody in this building, that will not be required to participate in the second phase of the CRC. Do you see the factor that because of the lead that the Scottish Parliament has taken in the reduction, that this may encourage others to do so?
Well, firstly, I'm grateful for Richard Lyle raising the performance of the Scottish Parliament. I certainly want to congratulate the Scottish Parliament on a very strong performance in the league table. It's kind of an irony in the sense that they no longer either require or wish to take part in the performance in this way and being covered by CRC. But they certainly have demonstrated, I think, good leadership, and indeed the Scottish Government has itself over many years tried to reduce its own emissions as well. But as to the specific reasons as to why the Scottish Parliament is no longer required, if I'm going to maybe direct that to Ronan McGarry from a technical point of view as to why they're no longer covered by CRC.
Thank you, Minister. I think I haven't actually seen Scottish Parliament's supplies themselves, but I think it's certainly just the case that they've dropped below the threshold for supplies, 6,000 megawatt-hours a year, so they must have just dropped below it.
Thank you.
Yes, Alec Ferguson.
Yeah, I wonder if the Minister was just able to confirm that once, assuming that this is passed, as I'm sure it will be, will we now have a completely level playing field across all the constituent parts of the UK? In other words, will everybody be at the same, there will be no competitive disadvantages as a result of this within any other parts of the UK?
Indeed, it's a UK-wide scheme, and the measures apply equally across the UK. So from that respect, there is a sort of level playing field for all businesses that are covered by the scheme.
There are no differences within this measure than any others?
No, I mean, clearly, as Ronan McGarry has indicated, there's a degree of involvement in SEPA in terms of giving guidance to businesses in Scotland, but other than that, the scheme is uniformly applied.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions to the Minister just now? If that's the case, then we should move to agenda item 4, which is on the CRC Energy Efficiency Scheme Order 2013 SSI 2013 draft. The motion will be moved, and there's an opportunity for debate at considerable length if it's required, and we will obviously follow that procedure. So from now on, if there's anything said, it's only the Minister or the person asking the question, that is speaking, who will be able to do so. No officials can take part. So I'd invite the Minister to speak and move the motion.
Formally moved, Convener.
Thank you very much. I invite any members to speak if they wish to. No member has indicated that they wish to. The Minister presumably is happy not to wind up. Therefore, I put the question to the motion. The question is that motion S4M 06209 in the name of Paul Wheelhouse be approved. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Therefore, the committee will see that this is reported, and we welcome this outcome. Thank the Minister and his officials for attending just now, and we will now move into private.